On February 23, 1945, Corporal Herschel Williams crouched behind a crater on Iwo Jima, watching his riflemen get ready for a mission. Most of them would not survive. The riflemen were Corporal Warren Bornholtz and Private First Class Charles Fisher, assigned to protect Williams while he carried 68 pounds of pressurized fuel on his back. The Japanese had strong, fortified positions across Iwo Jima, with concrete pillboxes set up to cover each other with gunfire. American Marines had been trying to move forward for days but could not. Every attempt ended with men dying in the volcanic sand from machine gun fire in places they could not reach. Williams had landed on Iwo Jima on February 21, 1945. He was 21 years old, 5 feet 6 inches tall, the youngest of 11 kids from a dairy farm in Quiet Dell, West Virginia. He joined the Marines in May 1943 after being first rejected for being too short. He had never heard of a flamethrower until the weapons arrived in crates on Guadalcanal in early 1944. Someone gave him the manual and told him to learn how it worked. Now, 4 days into the Iwo Jima campaign, he was the only trained flamethrower and demolition specialist left in his company. The others were casualties. The M22 flamethrower Williams carried weighed 68 pounds fully loaded. It had 3 tanks on a backpack frame. 2 outer tanks held fuel, 4 gallons of thickened diesel mixed with gasoline. The center tank held compressed nitrogen at 300 to 350 pounds per square inch, but was stored at higher pressure, up to 2,100 pounds, then regulated down for use. The weapon could fire for 8 to 9 seconds, projecting flame 20 to 40 yards, depending on fuel mix and if napalm thickener was added. It was much better than the M1 and M1A1 models that had caused problems before. The M1 was unreliable. Its ignition system used hydrogen and a battery spark. Moisture could short the system. The hydrogen cylinders could fail. Operators might stand in front of enemy positions with weapons that would not fire. On Buna, in New Guinea, in December 1942, M1 flamethrowers failed so much that infantry soldiers lost all trust in the weapon. The M1A1, introduced in 1943, fixed some problems by adding napalm thickener to make the flame go farther and a cartridge ignition system, but it still had reliability issues. The M22, standardized in February 1944, finally gave American forces a flame weapon they could count on. The ignition system used a spring-loaded pin to pierce a chemical cartridge, making an 8-second flame that lit the fuel as it came out of the nozzle. The system worked even in hot, humid tropical weather. The napalm-thickened fuel burned hotter and stuck to targets better than older gasoline mixes. The weapon could shoot flame 40 yards reliably, double the range of the M1. By the Iwo Jima operation, about 24,600 M22 units had been made and given to Army and Marine Corps units. But the weapon still had big tactical weaknesses. The operator had to get within 40 yards of enemy positions. That meant crossing open ground while under fire and carrying very visible equipment. The operator had to stand exposed for all 8 to 9 seconds of each burst. The bright orange flame and black smoke showed every Japanese soldier exactly where he was. Flamethrower operators became the most important targets on the battlefield. So did Marines carrying radios with antennas. Japanese snipers and machine gunners learned to spot these high-valued targets and fire at them. During the Battle of Iwo Jima, portable flamethrower units took terrible casualties. One Marine battalion's portable flame unit lost 92% of its men, leaving very few trained to use the weapon. These were not just wounds that could heal. Most operators who were hit were killed. The fuel tanks, while made not to explode, could break and leak. Compressed nitrogen would vent. The operator was left helpless in the open with a useless 68-pound pack on his back. American rules tried to fix this by giving each flamethrower operator 4 riflemen for covering fire. The covering team had a simple job: suppress enemy fire while the operator approached, give security during the flame attack, and cover the return to friendly lines. But the rules assumed the riflemen would survive long enough to do that on Iwo Jima. That assumption often turned out very badly. Japanese defenders quickly learned to spot flamethrower teams and put heavy fire on them. Machine gunners would wait until the team was fully committed to the attack, then fire from multiple positions at the same time. The covering riflemen, standing in the open while giving suppressive fire, were just as exposed as the operator they were protecting. Corporal Warren Bornholtz was 24 years old from Wisconsin. He joined the Marine Corps in 1942. Private First Class Charles Fisher was 20 years old from Montana. He enlisted in 1943. Both men knew their job: keep Williams alive long enough to get close to Japanese positions, suppress enemy fire while he approached, provide security while he burned out the pillboxes, then cover him while he went back to American lines. The average flamethrower team lasted minutes in combat, not hours. Fisher and Bornholtz knew this. Williams knew this. They went anyway. By mid-February 1945, the 3rd Marine Division saw a major problem with advancing toward the airfields. Japanese pillboxes were stopping every attack. Artillery could not destroy them. Naval gunfire could not reach them. Bombs from planes could not get through the reinforced concrete buried under 3 feet of volcanic rock. The Marines needed a weapon that could go inside the pillboxes and kill the defenders without putting infantry in constant danger. That weapon was the portable flamethrower. The problem was keeping the operators alive long enough to use it. On February 23rd, American tanks tried to make a lane for infantry through reinforced concrete pillboxes, buried mines, and black volcanic sand. The tanks could not break through. Machine gun fire from the pillboxes was deadly. The infantry advance had stopped. Williams, serving with 1st Battalion 21st Marines as a demolition sergeant, volunteered. His Medal of Honor citation says he went forward to try to reduce the deadly machine gun fire from the strong positions. He was covered by 4 riflemen. 2 of them were Corporal Warren Bornholtz and Private First Class Charles Fisher, assigned to protect Williams while he carried 68 pounds of pressurized fuel on his back. The other 2 riflemen's names are unknown, even after decades of research by military historians and the Herschel Woody Williams Medal of Honor Foundation. Williams and his 4-man covering team moved out sometime mid-morning, February 23rd. The exact time was not recorded in after-action reports. What mattered was the mission: clear 7 reinforced concrete pillboxes that were stopping the 3rd Marine Division's advance toward the northern airfields. The land gave almost no natural cover. Iwo Jima's volcanic sand was loose and black, making it hard to dig fighting positions fast. The area had shell craters from 3 days of naval bombardment, but the craters were shallow and gave little protection. The Japanese had great observation from high points across the island. Any movement in the open drew instant fire. Williams led his team forward in short dashes, moving from one shell crater to the next. The riflemen gave suppressive fire whenever Japanese positions fired. The tactic was simple, but very tiring. Advance 10 to 15 yards, dive into cover, check the situation, find the next safe spot, and move again. The volcanic sand was hot from the morning sun. Equipment was heavy, water was scarce, and every movement brought machine gun fire from positions the Marines could not always see. Within the first hour, the 2 unknown riflemen on Williams' team were hit. One was killed instantly by machine gun fire, probably from a high position the team hadn't noticed. The other was badly wounded and could not continue. He crawled back toward American lines, leaving blood trails in the black sand. Williams, Bornholtz, and Fisher kept moving forward. They had no choice. The whole division's advance was stuck. Companies were taking casualties pinned down by overlapping fire from the pillboxes. Williams had to destroy the pillboxes if the flamethrower team turned back. The infantry attack would fail. More Marines would die trying to take positions that regular weapons could not destroy. The mission had to continue even with half the covering team gone. The first pillbox was 40 yards ahead, partly buried in the slope of a ridge. Williams could see the viewport, a narrow horizontal slit about 6 inches tall with a machine gun barrel sticking out. Bornholtz and Fisher opened fire, shooting into and around the viewport. Williams moved. He ran forward, crouching, his flamethrower tanks bouncing on his back. 30 yards, 25, 20. Close enough. He dropped to one knee, raised the flame gun, aimed at the viewport. He pressed the front trigger to ignite the fuel, then the rear trigger to release it. A jet of orange fire shot from the nozzle. The flame arced across the distance in a tight stream, darker and heavier than normal gasoline fire. The napalm mixture gave it weight. The flame hit the concrete around the viewport, splashed through the opening, and went inside. Williams held the triggers down. The flame poured for 8 seconds. He heard screaming inside the pillbox. At 8 seconds, the fuel ran out. Williams let go of the triggers. Smoke came out of the viewport. No more machine gun fire. He turned and ran back to Bornholz and Fisher, keeping low. Bullets snapped past. He dove into a crater, lay there breathing hard, checking his equipment. The flamethrower was empty. He had to go back for a refill. That's when the second pillbox started firing. This one was to the left, maybe 50 yards away. The machine gun fire was accurate. Fisher walked toward Williams' position, firing back. Bornholz was trying to reposition for a better angle. Williams could not stay in the crater. He got up and ran zigzagging across open ground. He reached another crater and dropped in. He looked back.
Or just taking cover. He had no time to check. He had to get back to American lines, refill the flamethrowers, and return. The battle had just begun. He had 6 more pillboxes to clear. What happened over the next 4 hours would show why flamethrowers scared Japanese soldiers more than any other American weapon. The fear of fire is primal. Humans have lived with fire for hundreds of thousands of years. We learned to use it and to fear it. That fear lives in the oldest part of the brain, the part that acts before conscious thought. When faced with fire, instinct takes over. Every soldier can be trained to accept being shot or blown up, but no training can remove the natural terror of burning alive. Japanese soldiers on Iwo Jima had survived 3 days of naval bombardment. They endured artillery, barges, aerial bombing, tank attacks, and infantry fire. They held their positions. The fortifications were built to resist normal weapons. Reinforced concrete could take direct hits from naval shells. Multiple layers of logs and dirt could absorb explosions. Ventilation kept air breathable even under long bombardments. The defenders felt relatively safe inside the pillboxes. Bullets could not reach them. Grenades could not penetrate. Artillery shells exploded outside. They could wait inside, fight American infantry when they came, and retreat deeper if fire got too strong. Then the flamethrowers appeared. Fire did not care about concrete walls or ventilation. Fire used up oxygen. Fire filled enclosed spaces. Fire found every crack and opening. When a flamethrower operator fired into a pillbox viewport, the defenders had seconds to choose: stay inside and burn, or exit through the back and face American rifle fire. Most ran. Some tried to fight from inside. Very few survived either choice. Raymond Hart was a corporal with 2nd Battalion 24th Marines, 4th Marine Division. On February 21, he had taken a bullet through his helmet, creasing his skull and knocking him out briefly. He stayed with his unit despite the head wound. On February 24, Hart's battalion attacked a ridge line held by Japanese defenders. Normal infantry tactics had failed. Artillery had not pushed the defenders out. Tank support could not reach the positions because of the terrain. The battalion commander called for flamethrower support. Hart watched the flamethrower team approach the nearest bunker. The operator fired a burst through the opening. Within seconds, 3 Japanese soldiers came running out the back exit. They were not shooting, they were not throwing grenades, they were just running, trying to escape the fire. Hart's squad shot them as they came out. The bunker went quiet. Hart said later that he had watched Japanese soldiers stay in their positions through hours of artillery fire and long infantry attacks. But only 8 seconds of flame made them leave a strong bunker and run into sure death. That showed him something deep about human psychology. Training and discipline could beat many fears, but the fear of burning alive was not one of them. By late February, Marine intelligence officers were seeing a clear pattern. Japanese units that fought hard against normal weapons were breaking fast when flamethrower teams showed up. Defenders who stayed inside pillboxes through every artillery fire would run out the back when a flamethrower was used. Not every group reacted this way. Some veteran units with strong leaders stayed in place and took the hits instead of leaving. But even they showed stress when flamethrowers were used again and again. Lieutenant General Tadamichi Kuribahashi commanded the Japanese forces on Iwo Jima. He spent 8 months building the island defenses. He knew his force could not beat the Americans in a normal battle, so he planned a deep defense that would make every yard costly for the attackers. His plan depended on Japanese troops holding their positions, hurting the Americans and forcing them to fight for many weeks. The plan was working. Then American flamethrowers began taking out his strong positions one after another. Kuribahashi had no real answer for these weapons. Japanese training did not include ways to fight flamethrowers. The bunkers and tunnels that protected his troops from bombs and shells became deadly traps when fire rushed in enclosed spaces that kept bullets out, now filled with flame. Kuribahashi ordered his troops to shoot flamethrower operators on sight and treat them as top targets. But hitting a moving operator with heavy equipment was hard. Japanese snipers and machine gunners tried, and they did kill many operators, but they could not stop them all. And each operator who survived long enough to reach a pillbox could clear it in seconds. The Americans saw this huge psychological effect and increased flamethrower use. More operators were trained at special schools in Hawaii and on the mainland. More units got the weapons. Production was increased to meet the need. And most important, the Americans started putting flamethrowers on tanks, which fixed the deadly weakness that killed so many portable operators. The building of flame tanks had been slow at first. The Marine Corps left most of the work to the Army and ordered only 9 tanks per division. But battles in the Marshall Islands and Mariana believed they needed armored flamethrower support. At Schofield Barracks in Hawaii, a secret group called the Flamethrower Group began changing M4A3 Sherman medium tanks into flame weapons. The work was done by Navy Seabees under Colonel The Seabees combined parts from 3 flame unit designs: the Canadian Ronson system, the Navy Mark I, and the improved Navy Mark I that the Navy had tested and rejected. The result was the CB-H-1 flamethrower system, quickly replaced by the even better CB-H-2. Installing a flamethrower in a Sherman tank was hard work. It needed 150 pounds of welding rod and hundreds of electrical connections per vehicle. The cost was $20,000 to $25,000 per tank, almost $300,000 in today's money. The flamethrower took the place of the Sherman 75mm main gun. It ran on 300 pounds per square inch, like the portable M22. But while the portable unit held 4 gallons of fuel, the flame tank held 300 gallons. The portable unit could fire for 9 seconds. The flame tank could fire much longer. The portable unit had a maximum range of 40 yards. The flame tank could throw napalm 150 yards or more. The weapon could turn 270 degrees while firing, so the tank could hit many targets without moving. The Sherman M4A3R3 flame tank, which Marines called the Mark I or Zippo tank, had 3 inches of frontal armor. Japanese machine gun fire could not go through it. Japanese anti-tank guns had to hit weak spots to stop it. The tank had its own weapons, usually a hole-mounted machine gun and sometimes a coaxial 50 caliber machine gun next to the flamethrower. The crew was safe inside. The weapon was deadly outside. 8 flame tanks were sent to Iwo Jima for Operation Detachment. They landed on D-Day, February 19, 1945, but did not fight right away. The Marines waited until February 21, D+2, to use the flame tanks. The commanders wanted to check the tactical situation first. When the flame tanks moved forward to help infantry attacks, the effect was clear. Japanese positions that had resisted infantry attacks, artillery, and normal tank fire were cleared in minutes when a flame tank arrived. The Marines learned that one flame tank could do what a whole infantry company might spend hours trying to do with normal weapons. The tanks moved toward Japanese positions safely. Machine gun fire bounced off the armor. The defenders could not stop the tanks from getting close. Then the tanks fired. 300 gallons of burning napalm poured over bunkers and caves, destroying everything in its path. Japanese defenders who had stayed in positions through normal tank attacks ran when flame tanks came. The Marines quickly learned that bringing a flame tank often cleared a whole defensive area without infantry attacks. The defenders ran through their tunnels instead of facing the fire. Reports from Marine units all over the island showed how effective the tanks were. Battalion and regimental commanders started asking for flame tank support by name. The tanks became the most requested support on Iwo Jima, even more than artillery. Infantry units would sometimes stop and wait for flame tanks instead of attacking bunkers with normal weapons and taking heavy losses. The tanks were so valuable that they were moved between divisions rather than being assigned to one. Only 4 tanks were given to each tank battalion. With 3 Marine divisions on the island, that meant just 12 flame tanks for the whole operation. To use them best, the tanks were sent from central refueling points to the places that needed them most. A tank might help the 4th Marine Division in the morning and the 5th in the afternoon. The need for flame tanks showed something about the battle. Iwo Jima was not a war of moving armies. It was a war of strong defenses. The Japanese had spent 8 months making deep defenses. They dug 11 miles of tunnels linking hundreds of fortified positions. They reinforced bunkers with steel plates and coconut logs and covered them with 3 feet of volcanic rock and dirt. They placed weapons to cover every approach with overlapping fire. They built a system made to survive American firepower. Artillery could not destroy the positions. Bombs from planes could not get through reinforced structures. Naval fire, even from battleships, could not reach defenders deep in tunnels. The Americans needed a weapon that could kill defenders inside fortifications without putting infantry in constant danger. The flame tank was that weapon. Williams finished his mission on February 23rd after 4 hours of continuous action. The details of those 4 hours are in his honor of medal attestation and in his later accounts. He went back to American lines 5 times during the fight to refill the flamethrower and get fresh demolition charges.
Each trip back meant crossing open ground under Japanese fire. Each trip back meant carrying a fully loaded 68-pound flamethrower across dangerous land. Most flamethrower operators only completed 1 attack before being killed or wounded. Williams completed multiple attacks in 4 hours, destroying 7 fortified positions. The pillboxes he attacked were not normal field fortifications. These were reinforced concrete structures with walls up to 2 feet thick. They had steel doors and shutters that could be closed between firing periods. They had ventilation to keep air moving. They had many firing ports giving overlapping fields of fire. They were linked to trenches and tunnels to other positions so defenders could help each other or retreat if needed. These fortifications were built to survive American firepower. Artillery shells exploded against the concrete without getting through. Tank rounds might chip the surface but rarely caused major damage. Infantry attacks with rifles and grenades could not reach the defenders inside. The pillboxes were killing zones made to destroy attackers while keeping defenders safe. Williams defeated these positions not by more firepower, but by psychology. The flamethrower was physically deadly. The napalm burned over 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. It used up oxygen in closed spaces. It made toxic gases from incomplete burning. But its psychological effect was even stronger. When Williams fired into a pillbox viewport, the defenders had maybe 3 or 4 seconds to decide. They could feel the heat. They could see the flame coming through the opening. They could hear comrades screaming. In those seconds, training and discipline did not matter. Instinct took over. Instinct said, get out. Get away from the fire. Take any risk rather than burn alive. Some defenders stayed and died. Some tried to fight and died. Some ran out the back into American fire and died. The way they died was different, but the result was the same. Williams fired into a position for 8 seconds, then withdrew, watched to see if anyone came out, then either moved to the next target or used demolition charges to finish it. By the time he finished the mission, he had used many flamethrower loads, many demolition charges, and spent 4 hours under fire. He lost both covering riflemen, whose names he knew, Corporal Warren Bornholtz and Private First Class Charles Fisher, were killed giving cover fire. Williams learned of their deaths later, maybe that evening or the next day when casualty reports were done. The exact time is not in records, but the knowledge stayed with him for life. When he learned Bornholtz and Fisher died protecting him, his idea of the Medal of Honor changed completely. He said the medal did not belong to him. It belonged to the men who died protecting him. He wore it for them, not himself. This was not false modesty or words to sound humble. Williams truly believed his survival and recognition came at the cost of better men's lives. For many years, Williams did not know the names of the 2 riflemen who died. He only knew that 2 men were killed. He knew they had been part of his covering team. But in the chaos of battle,
And the days after, their names were not written down in any record Williams could access. It was not until decades later, when computer databases made military records easier to search, that researchers identified Corporal Warren Bornholtz and Private First Class Charles Fisher as the two covering riflemen killed on February 23rd while protecting Williams. When Williams finally learned their names, he made it his mission to honor them. He visited their graves. He spoke their names in interviews and speeches. He made sure everyone knew his Medal of Honor was really their medal, that his survival had cost them their lives, and that wearing the medal was his way of keeping their memory alive. The Battle of Iwo Jima lasted 36 days from February 19 through March 26, 1945. The American invasion force had about 70,000 Marines from the 3rd, 4th, and 5th Marine Divisions, plus supporting Navy and Army units. American forces suffered over 26,000 casualties. About 7,000 Americans were killed in action or died of wounds. Another 19,000 were wounded but survived. The casualty rate was over 30%, making Iwo Jima one of the costliest battles in Marine Corps history, measured by percentage of forces engaged. Japanese losses were catastrophic. Of the estimated 21,000 Japanese defenders, only 216 were taken prisoner. The rest, more than 20,000, were killed. Some died defending their positions. Some died in sealed caves when Marines used demolitions or bulldozers to close entrances. Some chose suicide rather than surrender. The Japanese casualty rate was over 98%. Lieutenant General Tadamichi Koribayashi, the Japanese commander, was killed in the final days of organized resistance. His body was never identified among the thousands of Japanese dead. The Butcher's Bill at Iwo Jima shocked American military planners and the public. This was the only major Pacific battle where American casualties exceeded Japanese casualties, though Japanese deaths far outnumbered American deaths. The battle showed what an invasion of the Japanese home islands might cost. If 36 days of fighting on an island 8 square miles in size killed 7,000 Americans, how many would die in the months or years to conquer Japan? These casualty numbers influenced American war planning. The extraordinary courage on Iwo Jima led to a record number of medals of honor. 27 medals were awarded for actions in the campaign, the largest number for any single battle in American military history. 13 recipients survived to get the medal from President Truman. 14 were awarded posthumously to men who died performing the actions that earned the medal. Williams was one of the 13 survivors. He would live longer than all the others, eventually becoming the last surviving World War II Medal of Honor recipient. President Harry T. Truman gave Williams the Medal of Honor at the White House on October 5, 1945. The citation said Williams showed great bravery and risked his life above and beyond the call of duty. It described his 4-hour action, his repeated trips back to refill his flamethrower, and his destruction of 7 pillboxes. The citation did not talk about the psychological terror his weapon caused. It did not say that Japanese soldiers feared flamethrowers more than any other American weapon. It did not mention that Williams' actions were part of a bigger pattern of psychological warfare that broke Japanese morale on the island. After the war, Japanese veterans were interviewed by American intelligence officers. Many said flamethrowers were the weapon they feared most, more than bombs from planes, more than naval artillery, more than tanks. The reason was simple. Flamethrowers meant certain death in a closed space. A soldier in a bunker could survive artillery. Concrete gave protection. A soldier could survive tank fire. Steel plates could deflect shells. But a soldier in a bunker could not survive fire. Fire used up oxygen. Fire filled the space with heat and toxic gases. Fire gave seconds to choose between burning alive inside or running into machine gun fire outside. Both choices led to death, but one was instant, the other meant burning alive. The choice was not really a choice. The American military studied this psychological effect. The Chemical Warfare Service, which developed and used flamethrowers, published studies on why they were so effective. Some officers said flamethrowers were more humane than normal weapons because they caused quick death. Lieutenant Colonel Orby Bostic, a chemical warfare officer in the South Pacific, wrote an article for the Chemical Warfare Bulletin in February and March 1944 called Mercy Killer: Instant Death from the Flamethrower. Bostic said flamethrowers caused instant death by shocking the nervous system. Victims lost consciousness and died without long suffering. This idea came from looking at bodies after flame attacks, which often showed little external burns. They concluded death happened fast from lack of oxygen or carbon monoxide, not from burns. So they thought flamethrowers were more humane than being shot or blown up. This analysis was wrong. It misunderstood what made flamethrowers psychologically powerful. The terror was not about how death happened. It was about knowing you were about to burn alive and having seconds to process that. Knowing you will burn to death is different from being killed by a bullet, which happens before you can understand. An explosion destroys consciousness instantly. Fire gives you time to know you are dying. That knowledge, those few seconds of complete terror, was what broke Japanese morale. Soldiers could handle quick death. They could not handle burning alive. The Chemical Warfare Service idea that flamethrowers were mercy killers was later proven wrong by detailed medical studies in 1945, but by then, the weapon had already shown its psychological power in combat. The misunderstanding did not change the fact that it worked. By April 1945, the American military was planning Operation Downfall, the invasion of the Japanese home islands. Casualty estimates were from hundreds of thousands to over 1 million American dead. Planners assumed Japanese resistance would be even stronger than on Iwo Jima or Okinawa. To prepare, every Marine division would get more flamethrower support. Flame tank production increased. The plan called for thousands more portable flamethrowers and hundreds of flame tanks before the invasion. Chemical Warfare Service production ran at full capacity. The logic was simple. If flame weapons could break resistance on small islands, they could break resistance on the home islands. The psychological advantage was too
Stockpiled for the invasion were never used. Most were eventually scrapped. The Americans used flamethrowers in Korea and Vietnam, but never on the scale planned for Japan. The weapon stayed in the arsenal, but its moment had passed. Williams stayed in the Marine Corps Reserve after the war and retired as Chief Warrant Officer 4 in 1969 after 17 years of total service across multiple enlistments. His path was not simple. He left active duty in November 1945, shortly after receiving the Medal of Honor. He rejoined the reserve in 1948 and served until 1949, then joined again in 1954. He served in units in West Virginia, his home state, and rose through the ranks. His final rank of Chief Warrant Officer 4 came from decades of reserve service. Like many combat veterans of his generation, Williams struggled with what would later be called post-traumatic stress disorder. For 17 years after the war, from 1945 to 1962, he had recurring nightmares, intrusive memories, and trouble adjusting to civilian life. These were normal symptoms for someone who had seen heavy combat on Iwo Jima. But in the 1940s and 50s, post-traumatic stress was not well understood. Veterans were expected to readjust without help. Most suffered in silence. Williams did not talk publicly about his struggles until much later in life. In 1962, Williams had a religious renewal that helped him cope with his combat memories and gave him a way to process his experiences. The exact details of this renewal are not fully documented, but Williams said it gave him peace about his wartime service. After 1962, he became more involved in veterans' affairs and support activities. He started talking more openly about his Medal of Honor action, but always to honor the men who died. His message was clear. The medal belonged to them, not him. He was just the caretaker. Williams spent much of his post-military life helping veterans, and especially Gold Star families, those who had lost loved ones in military service.
In 2010, at age 86, he started the Herschel Woody Williams Medal of Honor Foundation. The foundation's goal was to build monuments honoring Gold Star families in communities across the United States. These were not monuments to war or military victories. They were specifically to honor families who had sacrificed loved ones. The design had a bronze statue of a Gold Star mother grieving, surrounded by service flags for all branches of the military. The monuments were placed in public spaces, often near veterans' facilities or government buildings, so people would see and remember them. By the time Williams died in 2022, the foundation had dedicated over 100 monuments in communities across the country. Each ceremony was attended by Gold Star families from the local area. Williams went to as many ceremonies as his health allowed, often into his 90s. He spoke briefly at each ceremony, always focusing on the family's sacrifices, not his own. He understood that military service and sacrifice left burdens on the families as heavy as those carried by the veterans, and that these sacrifices deserved recognition and honor. Williams became chaplain of the Congressional Medal of Honor Society and served for 35 years. The society is made up of Medal of Honor recipients and exists to preserve the medal's legacy and support recipients and their families. The chaplain role was both ceremonial and practical. Williams gave spiritual support to fellow recipients, spoke at funerals of deceased recipients, and represented the society at events. He took the role seriously, seeing it as another way to honor those who earned the nation's highest military award. During his 35 years as chaplain, he attended dozens of funerals for fellow recipients, including many who served in World War II with him. Each funeral reminded him of the bonds formed through shared sacrifice and the shrinking number of survivors. Every year on February 23rd, Williams observed a private ritual of remembrance. He spent the day thinking about Iwo Jima, the battle, and the men who died. He avoided public events on that date if possible. He kept the day for personal reflection. He thought about Bornholtz and Fisher. He thought about the other Marines from his unit who didn't come home. He thought about the 7 pillboxes he had burned out and the Japanese soldiers who died inside. These were not celebrations of victory. They were moments of somber remembrance, acknowledging the cost of what had been done. Raymond Hart survived Iwo Jima, even though he was shot in the head on February 20th, the second day of the battle. The bullet went through his helmet above the front brim, creasing his skull but not hitting his brain. The impact knocked him out briefly and gave him a bad headache and ringing in his ears. Medical staff wanted to take him off the island, but Hart refused. He stayed with 2nd Battalion 24th Marines for the full 36-day campaign. He was officially listed as wounded in action, but never left the island for treatment. The helmet with the 2 bullet holes stayed with him for 75 years. After the war, Hart went back to New York and joined the New York Police Department. He served for 37 years, eventually retiring as a deputy inspector, a senior command position. He rarely talked about Iwo Jima during his police career. Like many combat veterans of his generation, he kept his war experiences separate and focused on civilian life. His co-workers knew he was a veteran and that he had been at Iwo Jima, but he didn't share details unless asked. In February 2020, at age 98, Hart attended the 75th anniversary of the Battle of Iwo Jima at the National Museum of the Marine Corps in Triangle, Virginia. He brought his helmet, still showing the 2 bullet holes from that February day in 1945. He also brought other personal items from the battle: dog tags, photographs, letters. Museum staff were amazed at the collection. Hart donated the items that day so they would be preserved for future generations. He met Williams for the first time at that event, even though both men had fought in the same battle 75 years earlier. They hugged as 2 of the last survivors of one of history's bloodiest battles, connected by shared experiences few others could fully understand. Hart told anyone who asked that flamethrowers were the decisive weapon on Iwo Jima. Not because they caused the most casualties, though they did cause many, but in the psychological sense. Flamethrowers broke Japanese defensive morale in ways normal weapons could not. Hart had seen Japanese soldiers hold fortified positions through hours of artillery bombing, coordinated infantry attacks with grenades and demolitions, and direct tank fire. He had seen defenders come out of bunkers after heavy attacks to drag wounded back inside and keep fighting. But when flamethrower teams appeared, the situation changed. Defenders who would risk anything else would not risk burning alive. That shift in psychology determined the outcome of many small unit fights across the island. Williams understood these truths. He had lived them. He had seen Japanese soldiers choose to die by bullets rather than face his flamethrower. He had seen strong positions that could survive hours of artillery fire empty out after just 8 seconds of flame. He had felt for himself that terror could do what regular weapons could not. The flamethrower was not the most powerful weapon in the Pacific War. It was not the most advanced. It was not even the most deadly in terms of total casualties. But it was the most psychologically effective. And in battle, psychology matters. Fear matters. Whether soldiers stay in a position or run away often depends on what they believe they can survive. Soldiers on Iwo Jima thought they could survive artillery, bombs, and rifle fire, but they could not believe they could survive burning alive. That belief, or lack thereof, shaped the battle as much as any plan or decision. That is how psychological warfare works in combat, not through propaganda or trickery, but through weapons that target basic human fears that training cannot erase. The flamethrower did that better than any American weapon. Its effectiveness was not measured by enemy killed per attack. It was measured by positions abandoned, defensive lines collapsing, and Japanese morale broken. Those results do not show up in casualty reports, but they decided the outcome of the battle.